fault or a fault line is a planar fracture in rock in which the rock on one side of the fracture has moved with respect to the rock on the other side. Large faults within the Earth's crust are the result of differential or shear motion, and active fault zones are the casual locations of most earthquakes. Earthquakes are caused by energy released during rapid slippage along a fault. A fault that runs along the boundary between two tectonic plates is called a transform fault. In a normal fault, the fault plane is nearly vertical. The hanging wall, the block of rock positioned above the plane, pushes down across the footwall, which is the block of rock below the plane. The footwall in turn pushes up against the hanging wall. These faults occur when the crust is being pulled apart due to the pull of a divergent plate boundary. The fault plane in reverse fault is also nearly vertical, but the hanging wall pushes up and the footwall pushes down. This sort of fault forms where a plate is being compressed. A thrust fault moves the same way as a reverse fault, but the fault is nearly horizontal. In these faults, which are also caused by compression, the rock of the hanging wall is actually pushed up on top of the footwall. This is sort of a fault that occurs in a converging plate boundary. In a strike-slip fault, the blocks of rocks move in opposite horizontal directions. These faults form when the crust pieces are sliding against each other, as in a transform plate boundary. Some of the most dangerous faults include the New Madrid fault line. The New Madrid fault line has recorded over 4,000 earthquake reports since 1947. This fault line is also called the New Madrid seismic zone and has the potential to devastate the states of Indiana, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi. The biggest part of the New Madrid fault line sits in Missouri. The damage from these earthquakes were extensive, and there has been recent speculation by the scientific community that believe that this fault line might be shutting down and moving elsewhere. In an issue of Nature, scientists believe the current seismic activity at the New Madrid fault line is only aftershocks from the earthquake back in 1811 and 1812. Ramapo fault line. The Ramapo fault line spans 300 kilometers and affects the states of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. These faults run between the Appalachian Mountains and Piedmont areas to the east. This fault remains relatively inactive, but scientists believe that it could produce some serious earthquakes. There was a study completed in 2008 that believes a 6 to 7 magnitude earthquake will very likely occur from this fault line. The last time this fault was the most active was believed to be 200 million years ago.
Seem much, 5 millimeters, but it's affecting a long section of the fault, maybe 5 miles long, involving millions of tons of rock. Now, it really doesn't matter here. This is a nice sort of field, there aren't any people, but further north, this creep process and the things that are happening beneath the earth are far more sinister.
The San Andreas Fault and its branches trigger more than 10,000 quakes a year. Sometimes the results are devastating. Just ask the people of Los Angeles or San Francisco. Over the last 2 decades, major quakes rocked both of these cities.
This earthquake is one of the most devastating in the history of California. The earthquake and resulting fires caused an estimated 3,000 deaths and $524 million in property loss. Damage in San Francisco resulting only from the earthquake was estimated at $20 million. Outside the city, it was estimated at $4 million. The sensible duration of the shaking in San Francisco was about 1 minute. The earthquake damaged buildings and structures in all parts of the city, and the county of San Francisco was in total sadness. On or near the San Andreas Fault, buildings were destroyed and trees were knocked to the ground. The surface of the ground was torn and heaved into furrow-like ridges. Roads crossing the fault line were impassable and pipelines were broken. One pipeline that carried water from San Andreas Lake to San Francisco was broken, shutting off the water supply to the city.
We can look at it in several aspects. You have human lives, you also have material, but there's something else. There's a human capital in between sort of the buildings and the lives. And human capital meaning that the hundreds of teachers, a lot of professors, doctors have died. And when you look at the rate of illiteracy in Haiti, which is extremely high, close to 70%, by having one teacher or one professor or doctor who perished in this condition already it's a major loss. But when you have 3 to 4 universities collapse, several doctors and scholars perish, not only that, some of the libraries, it's a loss of both human capital as well as physical resources that could benefit future generation. And of course, the psychological aspect, families completely wiped out. There might be sort of a child who's the sole survivor. How do you deal with the kind of psychological impact? Things don't change. There is now the geopolitical repercussion. Haitians who will be going to the Dominican Republic in search of not only medical care, work, shelter. Haitians will be coming to the United States by any means, boats and so forth. So you have the geopolitical aspect as a result of this major earthquake.
The thing with earthquakes is it's location, location, location. So as we saw with this devastating earthquake down in Haiti, that was a magnitude 7 rupture, but more to the point, it was directly underneath very large population.
Just like California, where most Americans may think all our earthquakes are centered. But California's San Andreas is just one fault zone. There are at least 4 active earthquake zones that cover this country, all of which seismologists say have had historic eruptions, and each could have another catastrophic strike at any time.
Earthquakes are a national hazard, and it's in these areas away from California, away from the places we think about, where there can be some of the greatest risk.
Madrid is the biggest fault line east of the Rockies. It extends 120 miles through 5 states, cuts across the Mississippi River in 3 places, and slices the Ohio River in half. Even now, the area averages a tremor every other day. A major earthquake here would affect 15 million people in 7 different states. New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania have the 70-mile-long Ramapo. What we do know is the last major activity on the Ramapo Fault was a 5.2 centered in Brooklyn, New York in 1884. And if that same quake hit today, there are now 8 million residents of New York City. All could be affected by the Ramapo Fault's dangerous reach.
Life goes on, but the risk remains. In an area this active, the next violent tremor could happen at any time.